the one thing is to reframe failure as feedback and stepping
Yeah.
stone for you're on the right path. Also, removing the personal factor out of being told no, because a lot of actors will say, well, that's rejection. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, not quite. Because it's not a personal thing, it's a business. There's no such thing as rejection. It's just that we can reframe that to it's just that your services are not needed today. And I think if you can reframe that to make it less personal, it becomes much more easier to adapt and to get out
Yeah.
of the dark places.
Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, it is my honor to welcome our guests because I know they're coming with a couple of things I deem very expensive. Their time is here to allow us some of his time. 24 hours been given to every man and every woman. How we utilize our time is really, really will speak much in volumes about you. The author is the journey. The journey is a powerful creator. It has created the individual before us. And so we want to honor Doc for coming and sharing and allowing himself to be I want to say vulnerable to us so that we can access some things that were deposited in him, wisdom, insights, and so forth, so that you and I can grow and become better human spirits while we're here on this planet. Thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment.
And thank you again, Ken, for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
It's an honor, man. Doc, one of the very first things that I do is I love leveling this question to everyone is to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, but also answer this question to help us understand, because I tell people that one of the prizes that we get as a result of going through our journey is to serve. And my question to you is, how do you serve mankind?
That's a very good question. So I serve mankind by being, a content creator, being a, a resource and a coach for actors and performers, as well as representing actors. So primarily, my full time business is I'm a talent agent for actors in New York City. So I represent actors full time for film, TV, theater, commercial print, voiceover, and my role is not just to be an agent, but also to create a space or work through any blocks that they're going through, whether it's um, mindset issues or imposter syndrome or fears of any kind. So I feel like my service is a little bit much greater than just being an agent, but also
Yeah,
being a resource. And I'm also a teacher. I teach at a community college psychology classes, and I've been doing that for 22 years. And I feel with that I'm imparting knowledge and imparting my own experiences, my own background, and kind of helping to mold and shape teachers, psych majors, as well as other important future leaders.
that's awesome. I love it. Doc, one of our customers to go back, I call it the beginnings of our beginning because that's this place, this location. I tell people we visit certain locations, if you will, as we are
Hmm.
moving through our life to get to become adults, independent adults, if you will. And the very first location that we hang out is called the family. In this unit right here, we're going to gain a couple of things for us that will be very impactful to our being. We're going to learn our communication skills there. We're going to learn about forming our beliefs right there. We're going to learn about pattern of behaviors, stuff like that. Also, we're going to start developing our mental limitations that we are going to be placing on ourselves and all those things we're going to encounter there. What was your family unit like?
Uh, I think for me, my early experience, in a sense, was learning that I was sort of different in my family.
Yeah.
And I was born into a family of blue collar athletes, and which is great. I'm the youngest of five. I have older brothers, and they were all into sports: football, baseball, hockey, and even coaching. And
Yeah.
for me, I had zero interest in sports, so I was more of a reader,
Yeah.
and I loved reading. I was a voracious reader. So the library was my sanctuary, and I started reading books about the brain and science and behavior, and that led me down to the path of where I am today. And just being different, because I didn't know how to relate to most of my family. My family did not know how to mostly relate to me
Yeah.
because of that difference and their worldview and my worldview.
Fascinating though, Doc. How young, if you will, were you when you were delving into the type of information about the brain and human behavior and stuff like that?
I would say it first started in elementary school. I don't remember the
Wow.
story, but I was often told as growing up that, my father always tried to put a glove or a ball in my hand to kind of play.
Yeah.
And I turned to him one day out of frustration and said, I don't want to play on the team. I want to own the team. And that kind of quieted them up. Everyone up in my family was like, okay, this is not an athlete. And that kind of got me to curious, but I was always a curious type of person. So I like to read, I like to ask questions. Even as a child, I was kind of branded the nosy kid, which
Hmm.
I still am today, a little bit nosy, but it's because I such had a curiosity about things
Yeah.
and curiosity about people. So for me, I would say as an early age when I was like before the age of 10, where I realized
Wow.
I was interested just in people and behavior, but really solidified when I was in high school because that's when I started like really reading a lot of books about the brain and about
Uh-huh.
behavior. That's what really, when I came to the realization I want to major in psychology when I go to college and university.
Yeah, that is
And that's
awesome.
what I did.
Awesome.
And so, it's been a kind of like a lifelong journey for me.
Yeah, that is just phenomenal that a young individual would be gravitating to such a profound subject at that age, if you will, the study of human behavior and the mind and all of these things, as you said. So here you began to digest all of this knowledge through reading. What was your relationship style towards those outside of the family? How did you relate to them?
I got along well, but it was definitely a challenge because they were much into sports. They loved them in sports. I had zero interest in it, and just like I'm sure they had zero interest in books and reading
Yeah,
and knowledge. So it was a challenge. And today it's sort of like they will come to me a lot of times. We need advice on this, or what would psychology say about this? And so it's a little bit different now. But
yeah,
growing up, it was a bit of a challenge, and I kind of say books were my sanctuary because it was my little escape
yeah,
into my own, being a loner as a child. I wasn't
yeah,
necessarily picked on or neglected or abused in any way, but I was a loner. I was like a
yeah.
lone wolf because I didn't really had know how to connect. My family did not really know how to connect with me either because, again, there was a major difference between us. But I mean, I'm blessed. I come from a great family, but it was a hard time connecting.
Yeah. And as you're heading into college and you said that you had already, I mean, you've been studying the mind and whatever human behavior for a pretty long time as a young individual. And you got into college. And now college is going to begin to strip you even a little further than what you are. You're just collecting knowledge as a high school. But the demand, if you will, from the knowledge that you're going to be receiving at that level in college is going to require some changes within you personally. How were you doing as you are digesting more of these principles, if you will, some of the higher principles in human behavior? How did that begin to form you as an individual?
It started to affect me as an individual. There were some advantages and disadvantages. Since I was pretty much a thinker, I kind of thrived in the demanding environment of college where
Hmm.
a lot of students struggled. I tended to thrive. So it was really the classes that I did very well in that were considered the most difficult, by most of my peers and other
Yeah.
college students. I got along best with the professors that everyone said to stay away from. My two best professors in college were also the most feared.
Yeah.
And not only did I learn a lot from them, I took multiple classes with them. They became close confidants and advisors of mine.
Yeah.
And it was the best thing I think I've ever did was not listening to everyone who was saying, stay away from this person or stay away from that person. And also on the other hand, some of the professors everyone loved, I wasn't that good of an experience for me. So it the one thing that it kind of, I think, really taught me, college, was kind of like go on my own path. And, kind of if anything, the lesson was like, okay, there's nothing wrong with being a lone wolf at times. There's nothing wrong with, as long as you're serving yourself.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah. That
was,
is.
I think, one of the biggest takeaways I've learned from from college, my
Yeah.
undergrad and even graduate careers. Yes, the workload significantly increased, but however, I felt like I was already equipped because I loved reading books, and of course, in college, there's
Yeah.
a lot of reading. So I think that
So yeah.
was sort of this is great, experience.
Yeah. It's awesome, man, to have that, to be able to be in that space and shine, if you will, and excel because it's something that you actually love to do. As you are,
Mhm.
again, gaining all this knowledge and you're loving to do these things. As you're studying and gaining, as I said, all the knowledge and insight, what did you begin to notice the effects of all that on you as an individual? What did you notice as any behavioral changes that you needed to, that you started to make as you're inputting all of this stuff? What was that, those things look like as they began to shine a light into your personality?
Sure. Great question. I felt for me, one of the biggest shifts, it was my mindset and looking at, not judging so much other people's behavior, but understanding it more. So, like, understanding where other people are coming from. So I was maybe not taking things too personal, or,
Uh-huh.
if someone was reacting in a certain or exhibiting a certain type of behavior, would not take personal. And also, it helped me connect with people more because yeah, I kind of understood other people's motivations and other people's,
Yeah.
drive. So it was a tool to enable me to connect with people on a more deeper level.
That's a powerful lesson to learn, Doc. And I wish that people and you guys that are listening to this conversation, I suggest you go back in and rewind and digest what the doctors talked about as far as relationships. One of the key values in relationship to learn not to be judgmental when you're dealing with others, but to allow yourself the opportunity to look at it from their point of view. And that skill set, you're going to have to learn to develop daily, daily, daily. It's not something that we are innately equipped to deal with because most people will just get out there and start judging. And as Doc said, he began to separate that. And as a result of him beginning to separate that, he gained much more intense relationships with people on the other side. So always, man, that's a great advice for all of us to take as we are approaching any
Mhm.
kind of relationship in our life. Talk to us a little more about that, Doc, because that's a powerful insight and a principle, if you will, for the human race to take and as a guide to begin to live their life, if you will.
Yeah, and having that understanding and way to connect with people is important because one thing that really I think helped me is less likely I was less likely to draw conclusions or make
Yeah.
sad judgments of situations without considering the true nature of it or going through the background. And I think when you understand relationships and just people in on a deeper level, it helps you can and not to be so reactive or not be
Yeah.
so judgmental because a lot of times that's how a lot of I think relationship and communication breaks down is we sometimes jump to faulty assumptions or faulty conclusions
Hmm.
about what
Yep.
the other person is thinking or doing. And it's not until you take a step back and say, "Well, what's really going on?" And I think that's the biggest sometimes I see sometimes the biggest misunderstandings in relationship are really just, failure to communicate rather than
Yeah.
like major impasses or differences. So that I think is a major component or major shift is you may not necessarily have a too much of difference of opinions. It's really difference of understanding. And I think if we take more time just to understand where the other person is coming from, it can help a great deal in our communication and in our relationship style.
Yeah. I think people, as the common thing, as they say, when people are communicating, someone is really listening just to answer. They're not listening to allow. And I love how you put it. Basically, you're collecting data and you have to take out your personal opinion about that data that you're listening to from that other individual. You have to take out all the personal stuff and let that raw data begin to speak to you. And then you can, from that information, you can use your critical thinking skills to assist and get some stuff. And then you're able to respond from a better, more equipped position than if you're just standing there waiting, already have your guns pulled and your perception is already set and you're not really connecting with the that
Hmm.
individual and what they're saying because you have to learn so much about you have to learn within that communication that is going on. You have to watch the body language. You got to watch all those different nuances of the breathing when they're communicating because it'll give you a lot more information if you pay attention, if you will. But you have to come out of your judgmental mindset and move
Hmm.
forward. Here you are, you're in school, you're getting your education. Talk to us as to when you graduated because you are in this field for much long. You've been there since 10 years old, grabbing data, and you graduated and you're coming to quote unquote the end of that area of your life and you're now going to go into the professional arena. What was your mindset? How were you looking at that particular process of your life? And what decision did you make and why did you make that decision about heading in that direction in your quote unquote professional life?
Yeah, and one of the things that was really interesting when this goes with college graduates in general is they're changing identity, which I don't think a lot of people talk about or much so is that there's a big change of identity, which can be a bit scary, now
Yeah,
at first or a little overwhelming because now you have to go into the workforce. And for me, it was a lot of trial and error. So,
yeah,
and I talk freely about it now. A lot of failures, but they were also learning experiences. So they weren't really failures, they were learning experiences. So one thing I often say is even when you're adapting from the student life and becoming more of a professional life, you're always learning. So I don't really even necessarily say you ever stop being a student of life. You don't. It's a constant
don't.
thing. You're always learning. So it's just a different framework or different context now. And the context now is now you're a working professional, but you're still
Yeah,
learning. And even today, I've had a PhD for the past 10 years. I'm always learning. I'm always reading. I'm always learning new stuff and new things
yeah,
because that's one of the keys I think to life is to always keep learning and never stop learning. So I think that was the biggest shift was like, look, I'm not going to stop learning
yeah.
in my life.
Let me
I'm
ask you a
not gonna
question.
stop. Yes.
Let me ask you a question. I think you stop learning when you die, Doc. There's no such thing as if you're alive on this planet, you're learning whether you're paying attention or not. You are
Mhm.
learning something. So, because we have the aspect that we talked about, the conscious and the subconscious mind, you are learning. So, you made a statement that you became a teacher. You're teaching, and you're in college. What drove you into that direction to begin to teach? What was it that you saw that you felt necessary to take that direction?
I think for me was having some really great teachers growing up, and also
Hmm.
some not so good teachers. I think that kind of motivated me to become a teacher because I even had when I was growing up in school, I had visions of me being in front of a classroom.
Yeah.
And even during my undergrad years, I kept saying I really want to get in front of a class and teach. So I think it was kind of always in my blood to be a teacher, to be an educator.
Hmm.
I've always found myself, and even in grad school as a teaching assistant, and a tutor. And so
Yeah.
that really solidified that for me when I was going for my master's. And then, I put my resume in for a community college. And one day I got a call up, right after Labor Day, actually, right before the semester began. Saying, we have a vacancy. Are you available to start tomorrow?
Wow.
Sure. And for me, one of the things that really kind of like served to remind me this is what I need to do is because when you teach at the college level, there's really no preparation for it. Because when you
Yeah.
become if you're going through K through 12 or secondary school, you have to go through get an education degree and take education classes and get certified. There's
Yeah.
none of that for a college professor. All you have to have is a master's degree.
Yeah.
So I was kind of walking in with no training,
Mm.
formal training.
Yeah.
I was kind of coming into where it's like, okay, either do or you don't. And so what I did was I channeled I would say first year of teaching on the college level, I channeled my other professors that I loved and those that weren't so great.
Yeah.
And so I knew what to do and what not to do. And automatically, right off the bat, I would say within the first semester, I had extremely positive evaluations. I had a lot of students thanking me at the end of the semester for a great course. And so that already told me I'm doing something correct. And this is where I needed to be. I needed to be in the classroom. And I feel like this, while I think formal education and teaching and education is great, but it's also sometimes just intuitive and just
Yeah.
connecting with people. And that's the ability I kind of had, was the ability to connect with people. And I think, yes, the mechanics of the knowledge base of having in psychology, but also the ability to connect with students. I always made it a point to get to know all my students' names, in class, which I actually heard is kind of rare in college.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes a lot of college professors don't even get to know the students' names. So, and faces. So I made it a point to do that, and that made a huge difference. So,
So how, go ahead, Doc,
Mhm.
because I want to know, I'm curious as to, here's this professor, this doctor in college, and you make a swing to do, to help actors and an agent and all of that stuff.
Yeah,
Where did that come from in you? Because I'm listening to the conversation and you haven't even alluded to anything of that sort at all as I'm listening, but this is how you had started the conversation. So how did that switch happen? Because apparently you're still
sure.
doing both.
Yeah, I've always done both. I've never really done a one or the other.
Yeah.
So I was always interested in the arts, even as a young person. So when I was in high school, I was in a drama club. When
Yeah.
I during my undergrad, graduate education, I took a couple of theater classes as electives, and acting classes as in the theater department as electives. And
Yeah.
I enjoyed it too. Yeah, I still love reading, I still love psychology, but I also kind of like being around performers. And so one of the things I did during my downtime, especially after getting my master's degree and working a little bit in social services when I first started, I wanted to act. So I did some community, plays. I did some short films, commercials.
Hmm.
Nothing, ordinarily large, but it was like just fulfilling that performance vision. Now, I also learned in my, brief stint of that was I didn't want to be an actor, but I love being around actors. And I felt more at home with the acting community than I did with, being around other academics. So I then pivoted where it's like, okay, how can I really serve actors and love being around actors, but not being one myself? So that's where I kind of, started to pivot slowly. It was a slow process, but I, really realized, well, I want to work with actors. I want to represent them. I want to kind of be a support system or a resource for them. And so that's where I started my company. I was doing this both while I was, launching my teaching career.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
then I decided might as well, I had my master's already. And I said, I might as well, I'm halfway there. I've always wanted to have a PhD. I said, might as well just go back to school and
Yeah.
just, you know, being that I was halfway there on the education journey. So I enrolled in the PhD program. It was an online program. It's an online program at Walden University. And I, started a PhD program. And then when it came time for do our dissertation, which is a thesis, a PhD
Uh-huh.
thesis, I focused on actors and
Yeah.
performers, and what we specifically examined in performers was self-sabotaging behaviors. So my
Mm.
dissertation was on actors and self-sabotage because it was a problem when I first started, and I mean it's still an issue today. But it was an eye-opening experience for me when my first year as an agent was noticing the high degree of self-sabotage that actors were engaging in, and I kept wondering what's going on with these actors. And then when I spoke to my advisors about that in school, they're like, this is a great topic. And
What
so I did my dissertation on that. And then several years later, I turned it into my book, which is Rise Above the Script. So,
Let me ask you something though, because you're talking about actors and stuff like that, and there's self
Mhm.
sabotage, and I'm not familiar with that industry as much as you are. What did that sabotage look like? Because you're basically getting some a piece of paper, if you will, and you have to act and read and did the piece, and you talked about imposter syndrome and stuff like that from an actor's point of view. I'm curious about that because, again, these are actors. This is you're taking something and creating a character. How would why would one be developing, if you will, a imposter syndrome and you're actually just creating character?
Yeah, well, so the profession itself, show business as an industry, it is very exciting and it is very you know you know attractive to go into.
Yeah,
However, it's also one of the most competitive industries
yeah,
to be a part of. It's estimated that only 3% of actors are
make it.
making a living enough to be an actor. The
Yeah,
other 97% need survival jobs and and need other sources of income. So that's a high staggering number. And so
yeah,
there's so many more actors in there are to acting jobs and characters that they can play. So a lot of actors are going to be constantly being told no, or this is not, that
yeah,
they're going to be turned away from a project because of the competition that's in there. Only one person can go out, get land an acting role or an
yeah,
acting part, and yet there's hundreds sometimes vying for that one role or that one part. So, the other hundreds people, several hundred people are going to be told no. And then a lot of times being told no over and over again
yeah. I
can
can
be
see. Yeah,
taxing on somebody. And what starts to happen is the imposter syndrome. Am I really an actor? Well, I can't get a job. It's been
yeah,
months and I haven't been hired on a project. So that self doubt can come in. And then of course you have family and friends, well intentioned family and friends that are, kind of hinting at maybe this is not for you. Or maybe
yeah.
it's time to get get a quote
A
unquote
real
real
job,
job.
as they say. Yeah,
So that can start to add up. And what was self-sabotage looking like would be like not showing up for auditions, being late for appointments, not preparing for auditions, turning
yeah.
appointments down. And so that's what self-sabotage.
Wow. I mean, I could see in the sense where a low self-esteem would happen as a result of hearing the no's 100 times, 1,000 times within a couple of months, 5 or 6 months. That's all you're hearing back and forth. I can see how it can impact an individual self-esteem and cause tremendous amount of self-doubt and begin to break down the self. So as you are noticing, you did your dissertation on all of these different things and you were picking up, I'm sure you picked up all these themes that you saw within uh, thousands of people and you began to work on educating them and making them aware and assisting them with the process of the mind. Talk to us about some of those type of encounters, Doc, that a couple of examples of people coming to you with specific things that you're able, from your time with them, able to move them through from being in the dark places, if you will, to that, giving them that new perspective, which will help them to begin to move through their pain.
Sure. Well, the one thing is to reframe failure as feedback and stepping
Yeah,
stone for you're on the right path. And also removing the personal factor out of being told no, because a lot of actors will say, well, that's rejection. And I'm like,
yeah,
no, not quite, because it's not a personal thing, it's a business. So, in my view, I look at there's no such thing as rejection. It's just that we can reframe that to it's just that your services are not needed today. And I think if you can reframe that to make it less personal, it becomes much more easier to adapt and to get out
yeah,
of the dark places. And also, it's important to remain connected to your purpose or to your why. And this
yeah,
isn't for every profession, really, not just for actors, but just to
yeah,
stay motivated and connected to what's the real reason why you're doing this.
yeah.
What's your real purpose?
Talk to me as your because I've been reading your stuff of hypnotherapists and all of the NLP training, all of these different modalities that you had acquired as you're moving through. How because I'm sure you different types of clients that you're getting, some of those hard cases, if you will, that are hard to move through from one to another. How effective when you bring in the hypnotherapy piece of it, do you see results and stuff like that by applying the principles
Mhm.
within the field of hypnotherapy and dealing with folks on or anyone doesn't have to be actors or anything, just a human being with adjusting mindset.
Well, the one thing that with hypnotherapy, what makes it so effective is it works with the subconscious mind.
Yeah.
So, which is really the driving force of our behavior. And yes, we have the conscious mind, we're aware of, and we're having this communication right now. But there's also a lot of programs that going through our subconscious that we're not completely aware of, but that's
Yeah.
guiding our behavior. And so, with hypnotherapy and NLP, we're kind of targeting the subconscious mind. So it might be, where this might work in a, because I really work in a non-clinical setting, would be to spend some time meditating, spend some time
Yeah.
reflecting on your thoughts and what it is you're going through, and just to remain connected. A very powerful tool that's often underutilized is visualization. And whether it's guided by someone else or you can even do it yourself, it's kind of a hypnotic process, is when you're visualizing yourself for success.
Hmm.
So imagine what could go right rather than imagine what could go wrong. So if you're about to give a presentation or do that audition or go on an interview, you run that scenario in your brain, in your mind, of it going very, very well, being a major success. And when you do this over and over again, you're training your brain for success.
Yeah.
And because your brain does not know the difference between reality and
Yeah.
imagination, or like fiction from nonfiction. So
Yeah.
it's going to act as if, just like, on the other hand, if you have someone who has a lot of anxiety and depression, our thoughts can make us just feel even worse if we
Yeah.
focus on the negative. We will actually feel like it's actually happening. But if we can flip that now and take that same technology that, a lot of people, when they ruminate, when they're anxious and depressed, and now switch it to positive focusing, it's more likely to wire you for success and to change behavior. And that's much more rapidly than traditional therapy, because traditional therapy
Yeah.
kind of works with the conscious mind.
Yeah. And all of you guys are listening to us with Doc, man. And I know there's a stigma with many people with hypnotherapy and all that stuff because of you see
Hmm.
things in Vegas and all these people acting as chicken and all that stuff. That is just the entertainment aspect of it. There's a clinical aspect of hypnotherapy that is powerful, that is able to move you through, as Doc was describing, within that subconscious arena and move you through your situation effectively. And I know many of you are apprehensive with it, but get in touch. We're going to give you guys docs, links, and stuff like that. Get in touch with them. Become, inquisitive about it. That's how one starts a
Hmm.
good journey, is by becoming inquisitive and asking him questions
Yeah.
and walking with him. Yeah,
And I will say that too. I mean, that's the biggest fear or misconception is the mind control. What I often kind of say, the hypnotic process. Now, it may not be formal, but we go through this so many times in our life already. Whether we get engrossed in a movie, we get engrossed in a book, lost in a book, or kind of like or listening to a song when it brings you back to a memory or it
yeah,
ignites a feeling in you. That's the same process of what hypnosis is. So when people say to me, like, I'll hear a lot of one of the misconceptions is like, some people say I can't be hypnotized. I'm like, you've already, went through it hundreds of times already. Maybe not
yeah,
formally, but you've already been through the process. And it's not mind control. You can't, one of the biggest truths that I've learned about hypnosis, you really can't make anyone do anything against their will,
yeah,
or like what someone is morally opposed to doing. So what you're also not seeing is like when you see these shows in Vegas and people are doing, these things, they're volunteering to do it. It's their own free will. They're in control. They're just a little more relaxed. That's all it is.
yeah. Yeah, you
And they're
have to
more
be
focused.
willing to. That's it. And you guys, like I
Absolutely.
said,
That's the biggest thing is
don't be
willing.
afraid. Yeah, don't be afraid to come and experience from the clinical side, the entertainment side. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But those people agree to that. And so now, if you agree to the clinical side, look at what you would receive. So there's a difference that out there, just like many different, you have traditional medicine and then you have alternative medicine, that type of things. Don't allow that stigma to keep you from getting your breakthrough, if you will. Doc, I
Hmm.
have a final question to ask you, man. You have the mic. It's connected to all of us. There are 8 billion people on this planet. What advice would you give to us?
Well, I would say the main thing is to keep staying focused in the sense that Don't lose your why. Don't lose connection to your why. Don't lose connection to your focus, to your purpose. Stay true to yourself, even if that might mean, might be a little bit scary at first. So the one thing I want to talk about is stepping outside your comfort zone. I think is important. Doing something a little bit different each time. Putting yourself out there is important because you never know when somebody else can benefit from what you have to put out. And so don't let fear hold you back. Would be the biggest thing I would say.
I would agree 100%. Thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment, allowing us access again to your insights and your journey and your time and all of these different things. I appreciate it deeply, and I thank you so much for coming.
Thank you again, Ken, for having me.
It's an honor, Doc. Thank you. Doc, that was great.
Thanks for tuning in to Threads of Enlightenment with Ken Primus. Hopefully you're now feeling more empowered to overcome the challenges in your life, whatever they may be. Share that inspiration with others by telling them about this podcast, rating it, and of course, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. For more connection, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Threads of Enlightenment. Until next time, stay enlightened.